The legacy, when I started working for the Football Association, I immediately wanted to try, as hard as that may seem, to just raise the overall standard of coaching for our youngest players. I worked for 3 years as a sole trader with a bag of balls, some cones, some equipment, and I went around all the schools promoting football de salão, futsal, and also it gave me such a deep insight into what coaching needs to look like in order to fully engage children to get them coming back the next week. And so we really tried to turn around this whole landscape that seemed to be stuttering towards something that would never produce players that would be able to compete and win at the highest level. Grassroots football in this country for me is the best thing ever, and it's also potentially the worst thing ever. We've got all of these children, and it's almost a postcode lottery as who's getting the best deal, because there's a lot of kids who are not. In that age bracket of 5 and 6 years of age, we have got thousands and thousands and thousands of children who we need to make sure that we get it right with. You can be highly skillful without dribbling, but your level of decision making and your technical competence, that's the skill.
With the English senior team, what were we doing wrong?
Crikey.
Peter, in my opinion, and many others, you are one of the top youth coaches that England has ever developed. What legacy would you like to leave behind to English football when you retire?
Well, I think I'm in semi-retirement now,
Okay.
and I have to contest that claim because I've been on my own coaching journey that's taken decades, and I think I'm better than I was, but even at 70 years of age, I really think there's more to come. So I'm not the finished product yet, and there are so many coaches out there who will go way past anything that I've achieved. So I've had the best journey ever, been involved in the best game ever, working for the best people ever. So I've been very lucky in that respect. The legacy, when I started working for the Football Association, I immediately wanted to try, as hard as that may seem, to just raise the overall standard of coaching for our youngest players. I think it was okay, but with my background in education and teaching, I knew if we linked all of that evidence, research and all that good practice together with what everybody knew about football, I think we would have the perfect combination of understanding teaching and learning and understanding about football, and then apply that to the development of our youngest players. And I thought if we could get that right, we could really begin to raise the standards. So I don't know whether I've achieved it. Hopefully I have, but that would be my legacy, bringing those three things together.
You touched on it there to talk about some of your background in teaching, but could you give our listeners a little bit more of an understanding of some of your past roles and your career in football?
Yeah, I finished playing at around 35. I played non-league, and then I became player coach of the team that I finished playing for, which put me on completely the other side of the fence. And my immediate thought was, I have to make this enjoyable for the players, because if it's enjoyable, they're going to work harder and we're going to get more returns. So that really set me off on my coaching journey, if you like, because then I started the FA qualifications. I then had a career change, and I went from an engineer to a primary teacher. So I did a degree. I started off with a Bachelor of Education degree and then changed to a BA in English Language and Literature because I loved the English language and the books that emerged, particularly in the Victorian era. This is going to shock quite a lot of people. And I just fell in love with English. I went to teach in a primary school. So I've worked with the youngest children, and then quite randomly, I worked for 8 years in a further education college working with 16 to 19-year-olds. And there were obvious differences, but there were also so many similarities with the primary age children that I used to work with, that I really felt that being in a domain that I could work with young people to help them release their potential was something that I really wanted to do. So another big reveal is that my club is Walsall. They are my hometown. They are the team that I've supported for as long as I can remember. And so I applied to them to work at their Centre of Excellence. It was a voluntary role. And I think this is a message for coaches, that I worked for 5 years voluntarily, buying all the SAQ equipment, all the different size footballs, getting new bibs because the club couldn't afford it. But we wanted to give the players the best experience. So those 5 years were really, really valuable.
What year was this, Peter?
In and around the 1990s.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the EPPP as we have now, but we had FA monitors who would come in and monitor the centres of excellence. But it's a completely different landscape now with all the developments regarding the EPPP. At the time, I was just finishing at Walsall. That's when I was working at the FE college, and one of the tutors there was an FA assessor at the Centres of Excellence. So he saw me working with the students, because I took the football teams on a regular basis. And he recommended me to a gentleman called John Peacock, who was an FA national coach, who had just taken over at Derby County as their academy director. And John rang me and said, would you come and work full-time for me and look after our younger players? And so I went there and worked with the under-7s right through to the under-14s. And that really set me on a path of football being a full-time job. Because before then, like thousands of other coaches, I combined it with my home life, a full-time job, and everything else that goes with that.
And how did you end up progressing into working for the FA?
I actually got the sack. Well, I was made redundant from Derby County. A new academy director came in. Within days, he'd said, Pete, you're not for me. I could have been upset, but I wasn't, because he didn't know me. He didn't know what I stood for. He didn't know the work that we'd been doing. And so I couldn't really take offence. So at the same time, I was moving from the Midlands up to the Northwest. And so really being made redundant stopped me, or prevented me from making a 2.5 hour round trip every day to the academy. So it was actually quite pleasing. Then I think there was a really significant part of my journey, because I worked for 3 years as a sole trader with a bag of balls, some cones, some equipment, and I went round all the schools in Wigan, where I live now, promoting football de salão, the Brazilian soccer schools, futsal, and also it gave me such a deep insight into what coaching needs to look like in order to fully engage children, and because I was a sole trader, to get them coming back the next week. Because if they didn't, I didn't have any money. So I worked for 3 years there, and then the FA approached me, and I was a regional coach with them for 3 years, and then I got my national role for the next 14. So a bit of a varied journey.
Yeah. And then how did that end up coming about, where you got involved in contributing to creating some of the courses? Because I understand that you were a big factor in the youth modules that we have. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky. I had people at the FA who actually trusted in me and believed in me. And so that trust ended up with me being asked to write the Module 1 of the Youth Awards. And I literally locked myself away for about 4 months and then came back with all of the resources, the philosophy behind it, all of the PowerPoints, all of the tutor training resources. And because it was the first module to be rolled out, I felt it really had to concentrate on what was the main aim, and that was to say, these children might be playing football, but they are children first and football players second. And if we can get that over, I think then we can concentrate on helping coaches understand how important it is to understand the children as children and where they are developmentally, and then align that with what we want them to get better at and to achieve within a football setting. And that's what the Module 1 was about.
We had John Allpress, as I said earlier. I said, he was on a previous episode, and he explained that he created the coaching award. So did you already have that in place and you were building on that?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
John had put that course together and it was really successful. And the youth modules, modules 1, 2 and 3 really emerged out of that.
Yeah.
And John was the one who lit the blue touch paper in linking teaching and learning with, everything that we knew about football.
Okay.
And he was a real catalyst to my own development, but also the direction that our courses went on in the subsequent years. It was probably late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay.
When you were creating the philosophy, and did you have any influences from maybe other FAs, federations, other countries, or how did you come about creating that?
When it was more when we worked on the England DNA that we had those wider influences, because we included other governing bodies, so that they were also going through that kind of introspection where they were looking at their own provision for the very youngest players. The work that we were doing was almost trailblazing, and other governing bodies then said, well, can we look at what you're doing, share best practice, and so that we can develop our own methodology, if you like, for our sport. Okay. So I'd already been influenced. In fact, when I was at the college in Stafford, where I was working with the FE students, I actually developed a course, an evening course for mature students about coaching football, an international perspective. So we looked at what happens in Brazil, what happens in Spain, what the Dutch were doing, because at the time the Dutch were really prominent. That they were head and shoulders above a lot of other development programs. So I did the research, put it into a course over so many evenings a week. And again, I had people at the college who trusted me to say, we've never done this before, but go ahead and we'll see how it goes. And it was great for me, and hopefully it was great for the people who came on it.
Was the internet a big factor for you to be able to pull information?
It was. I think I had the franchise for the Brazilian soccer schools for 5 years.
Yeah.
So they obviously did staff training, and we were lucky enough to have World Cup winners with Brazil who were coming over.
Is this with Simon Clifford?
With Simon, yeah. And Simon and I were really close. And then I thought I'd reached a point where the type of training that was being advocated for the Brazilian soccer schools was great, but I wanted to push the boundaries and really combine quite a structured approach with one that was a bit more fluid. And it might sound a bit strange that the Brazilian methodology was quite structured and quite organised. And I'm going to use the word rigid, but I don't want to use that negatively. I wanted to really free up the players. And And I went. I didn't take on the franchise when it came to an end, and I really began this process of, really trying to find out what good could really look like for our youngest players.
What did you think we were getting wrong in England around this time? Why did we need to change?
I think we were really good at understanding football and football tactics. And I think a lot of coaches thought that if we know that, we'll get all the answers from knowing about that. What we explored with the Youth Awards was really, if we can get it right with the players and understand what makes them tick, how can we help them to become fast and effective learners? How can we help them to become really good decision makers? So understanding about skill acquisition and about affordances and scanning and all of that went into the melting pot. I'm not saying it wasn't there before, but we really wanted to draw coaches' attention to the importance of these things because they weren't included in the development programs to the degree that we thought that it might be. There was a research project done by John Moores University, and it talked about the percentage of time that was spent on warm-ups, physical conditioning, and unopposed and low decision-making practices, and it was really high within our academy system.
Yeah. I think I've actually read that research project compared to Spain, Portugal. Yeah, there. It's more a lot of decision-making practices, a lot of problem solving. Yeah.
So
I was just gonna say, so that's even happening within warm-ups,
Well, it's if you have 2 hours a week with your players.
Yeah.
If you're doing 20-minute warm-up, then you're doing some activation and some other physical conditioning, and then you're doing a passing drill that doesn't really, involve anything really related to the game. So there's perhaps no opposition. The decision making is very low. I pass to you, you pass to him, and that's it. If a large percentage of your 2 hours is spent doing that, we found out that the game was probably a 20-minute thing at the end of the session if the players had behaved and done everything before that was boring the pants off them. So I'm being quite graphic now, but that was the worst case scenario. We knew we could make immediate improvements just by saying, let's increase the level of decision making. Let's have more opposed practices. And so they became the content for our courses, the key messages on our CPD events. And so we really tried to turn around this whole landscape that seemed to be stuttering towards something that would never produce players that would be able to compete and win at the highest level.
I'm just going to interrupt the podcast for 30 seconds to tell you about We Make Footballers. We Make Footballers are the largest football coaching provider to children aged 4 to 12 in the UK, operating across 200 facilities. We focus on developing the individual, working on the technical and physical components of the game, and it's had amazing results, with hundreds of our ex-players joining professional academies and 4 of our ex-players currently playing in the Premier League. Our program is built around small-sided play using indoor and outdoor facilities. Visit our website, wemakefootballers.com, to see if we have a training facility in your area. That's really, really interesting. And obviously, I've explained to you before, the audience that we have are generally parents of children that want to succeed at football. Some of them actually want their children to be footballers, but at least the very best they can be. The majority of our audience, their children are playing in grassroots football. Now, what you described there, I think that still happens a lot. How often, if you're walking through a park and you're watching practices happen, and I'm always interested, I'll watch what other people are doing, and you will see passing practices that, won't have decision-making happening in them. The parents watching that wouldn't know any better, they're thinking, well, my child is on the move, they are getting reps in, so there is receiving and control happening and the technique of passing, but we're so determined to have England be the best football nation. Well, I am, Marcelo's Portuguese, but Marcelo's, you live here and you still want to understand why England don't do as well as maybe some of the other nations. And what we maybe think is that in Spain, in that same practice, the grassroots coach is finding a way to bring decision making into that practice.
Is it because I know that there are a lot more qualified coaches in Spain at maybe a higher level than here? So do we need to get that bit right, where we need to have more qualified coaches at grassroots, so they are to know what a good practice or is supposed to look like?
Yeah, I think grassroots football in this country for me is the best thing ever, and it's also potentially the worst thing ever. I think it's the best because no other country has got the kind of pyramid that we have got. So we literally have thousands and thousands and thousands of young children who enter our pyramid at the very first step, at under sixes, under sevens. That recruitment is getting earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
Not every country has that. But the coaches, adults, managers of those very young children are predominantly parents who may have played football in the past, have got no real coaching qualifications. And I don't want to say that's a blanket statement, because I know some are very keen to get their qualifications. And so if you don't know what good looks like and you've played a little bit, you will probably replicate what you used to do in training and what was done to you. And so that's where we got this thing about 6-7-year-old children lapping the pitch. Well, as an adult footballer, that's probably what you did as part of your warm-up all those years ago. So, and because you are you're working full-time and you're a part-time coach, and that it involves so much, you may not have the time or the inclination to go on any CPD events or to take the time to do your coaching qualifications, so that you can get a slightly deeper insight into, what it could look like. And so we've got all of these children, and it's almost a postcode lottery as who's getting the best deal, because there's a lot of kids who are not. And when I spoke at the beginning about trying to raise the standards, it was about getting these messages out to the wider public, so that we could say, do you know what? We have to do right by our young children.
Yeah.
It's such an important stage in their development, both as children and as children who are engaging with sport, that we have to try to get it better and to try to get it right in a way that we may not have done in the past. And I felt as though that was my role.
You referred earlier to the England DNA. I tried to ask John Oldpress what the England DNA was, and he hadn't worked for the FA for quite a few years, so maybe I put him a bit on the spot. But in the comments, a lot of people probably had some frustrations because they weren't necessarily clear on his answer with what it was. Would you be able to give us a description of what the England DNA is?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned trust earlier on, and when Dan Ashworth was technical director, he took a really bold step and decided that the FA, the England teams, seniors and all the development teams didn't really have an identity. So we didn't really know what we stood for, what the players were coming to England for, the kind of experiences that we were giving them. And so he developed the England DNA. I went to him and said, if you want that with the senior teams and the teams that lie underneath, the 15s, the 16s, the 17s, I said, I can start that process off if we get the England DNA into the foundation phase. We can give you what you want there, and we can start the process off for you. So we just said, off you go. And that almost released me and gave me so much motivation and so much commitment to something that I'd already been passionate about. So I can talk in detail about the foundation phase DNA, but the England DNA was about knowing why each player who is selected for England, why they want to play for England and what really motivates them. Because we all thought that their motivation was putting on the England shirt. Some had a background in another country. Their parents weren't English. And so their motivation was slightly different. And we would, part of the England DNA, the first steps was to say, let's understand what everybody brings when they come to an England camp. And we galvanise that because we know it really deeply and we understand it. We can galvanise that to bring in the team together. And the one thing that Gareth Southgate has done during his tenure is really create an environment where everybody feels as though they belong and everybody is motivated to doing their best for England. So from that, understanding the player, and it goes back to the youth modules, which was about, if you're working with children, understand the child and then understand football. But if you don't understand both, you've only got half of the answer. So understanding the players who came for England was a really important step, and there was a lot of work that went on with that. We also wanted to develop a way of playing, both offensively, defensively, and in transition. And a lot of work by the technical coaches was about, well, how do we really want to play? And so that was all documented. That became the blueprint then for if there was an England camp, this is the way we want to play. These are the practices that are going to allow us to get better at those things. And so it was the driver behind everything that happened in selecting England players, because if you want to play a particular way, we need a player who can do this. If you want a defender to be able to break out into midfield and join the attack and give us an overload in midfield, we need a player who can do that. That's part of his profile. So it directed and guided everything that we did. And we'd never really had it to the same extent before.
And just in terms of a timeline, sorry to keep asking you about the years, but it's helpful for the story. Can you remember kind of like what time this was that these change happened?
Yeah, probably 2014.
Okay. And with the English senior team, what were we doing wrong?
Crikey, I don't know whether I'm qualified to answer that. I think we'd always put an emphasis on physicality, that never say die approach, that combative, a personality. And because I grew up in a different era to this, people like Frank Worthington, Tony Curry, Rodney Marsh, they were standout individuals, but they were almost like the outliers. I had this vision where we had Rodney Marshes or Lionel Messi, if we want to bring it up today, in every academy. And we knew what to do with them. We knew how to deal with that maverick or that player who didn't always conform but could change a game in a heartbeat. I knew that we had those players in the academy system. We just have to release their potential so that we could really see what they were going after. And it's easier to do this if we start it really, really early.
Do you think we do that better now?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think we could still get better at doing so?
Yes.
At creating more Messis, Ronaldos, players that dribble?
Yes. Not necessarily.
But that's seems to be what. No, but that's what he was describing. I mean, I remember this would be like 2008, maybe 2009. I was coaching at no, it's earlier than that. It's like 2006, 2007. Coaching at Chelsea Academy. They gave me a group for under 8s, and this was really early in my coaching journey. You know, when we bring kids into the half term, and so even maybe around Reece James might have been in this group. I'm trying to think of the years, but anyway, they gave me this team, and I'd only experienced coaching at Grassroots. So I thought that if my team under 8s won against all the other Chelsea groups that day, then I would be regarded as a very good coach. And so I'm screaming at my kids, pass, shoot, all of that. The academy director, Jim Fraser, he came over and he's very polite and he said, Sean, please don't say that to the children. If you say pass all the time like that, then how are we going to produce a player like Ronaldo? Because imagine Ronaldo was told to pass by his coach, he would never dribble. So I was like, oh, fair enough. Okay, cool. Do you think we've gone too far the other way? Because I feel that probably has been pushed down to a lot of coaches to say, we need dribblers, we need kids to stay on the ball. But then has that meant that the academy has filled up with a lot of players trying to be like Ronaldo and Messi?
Yeah, I think that's the danger. I think this is where, you know, if you've got key messages to communicate, in putting the messages together, you think, I'm saying this, but when you hear it, you're thinking, this is what it means. And sometimes there's a mismatch. We had this with the foundation phase DNA. The real driver, and it was an FA strategy for 4 years, and it's continued for the next 4, luckily. We wanted to develop more skillful players. I think a lot of people, certainly in grassroots, more and also in the academies, they equated that with players who could dribble. You can be highly skillful without dribbling, but your level of decision making and your technical competence, that's the skill. And I think we had this phrase about allow your players to stay on the ball for longer. And immediately there was a backlash by saying, oh, so you're saying you want the children to be ball greedy. You want them to ignore their teammates. You don't want them to pass. It wasn't like that at all. If you encourage someone to stay on the ball for longer, you can help them with the decision making that will come as a result of being on the ball for longer. If you're saying pass, pass, pass all the time, and the children are getting rid of the ball all the time, 2 things happen. They never build a really secure and confident connection with the ball because you're telling them to get rid of it as soon as they get it. And also, they never get a chance to see how they can influence the game with the ball at their feet.
Well, they're still not making a decision.
Yeah.
You're still removing the decision making because all you're saying is pass. They can, part of being, good football, the best footballers make the best decisions. Yeah. So when it's the right time to dribble,
exactly.
when it's the best time to pass, take 2, take 1 touch.
Yeah. So if I've got a group of players and I've encouraged them because they might be 5, 6, 7 years of age, I need to build that connection. So it's you are gonna get fed up of having a ball at your feet. But over time, this is where the knowledge of the coach comes in, you start to see when somebody has got that connection with the ball and their head starts coming away from looking at the ball to looking at what's around them. Yeah. That's when they're ready for you to work with them to say, right, now you don't have to think about where the ball is. We can use all that cognitive space to think about what your next decision might be. But I think we were trying to do it too early. We were saying to 6 and 7-year-olds who, didn't even know where the ball was in relation to their feet. We were telling them to pass it, do this, do that, do the other. They couldn't do it because they didn't even know where the ball was. So they had to keep looking down at it. And if you're looking down at it, you're not aware of what's around you in order to inform your next decision.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
I think there was a study on it as well where I read, I think it was from a Spanish coach as well. It was the earlier you can get that relationship, the kids to have that relationship with the ball, where they don't have to look at it and they're able to look up, then the decision making comes, and the ones who can get that earliest usually are the better players.
Yeah.
So, in its simplest way of kind of interpreting this, I think there has been a lot of people that have interpreted the way to coach as get the child to be brilliant on the ball and master the ball, and don't concern them with tactics or the other parts of the game too early. Make sure they've mastered that, and then you can build in decisions and tactics once they've mastered it. I think there's flaws in that, though.
Go on.
Mark, I think it's what Pete said. It's doing it really early, because at 5 and 6, I think it's fair for them to have that relationship with the ball. You're thinking maybe a slightly older. At what age is?
No,
what age are you thinking?
still,
even then,
still 6, 7. There is
there'll be
game
practices.
Understanding that can go to a very advanced player. Let's talk about Rue as the example. he's got ball mastery. You know, he's probably can do 500 kick-ups. This boy is young. He's under 7. So
he might be ready. Then it's a case by. It's not a one size fits all. It's when that kid is ready. If you see he is comfortable enough on the ball to then get their heads up, then fine.
So it's nuanced. But what I think has happened is there's a lot of coaches that don't appreciate that nuance. It's that they've just interpreted you don't do any decision making, you don't do game understanding until 12 years old. It's you must master the ball, and it's only that.
No, if that's how certainly the foundation phase DNA has been interpreted, that is wrong.
So for the listeners, what is the foundation phase, and what age does that include?
Foundation phase is usually, well, you can't register players at the academy until they're under 9. So under 9, excuse me, to under 11. Some academies have pushed their foundation phase a little bit higher to under 12s, because it's at that under 11, under 12 age. It's also the years where the kids are going from the little school to the big school, and there's a lot of transformations happening or transitions going on. So to smooth that out, some academies have left the players in their foundation phase system with that foundation phase philosophy for another year, just to help things settle down. But the academies are recruiting earlier and earlier, and I think if you do, you have to do what is developmentally appropriate for those children at that time. And I think you're both right. I think if you think it's just ball mastery, that's only half of the solution. The decision-making aspect is the thing that is going to separate you from the good to the great. And I think for our youngest players, we can start the decision-making process off alongside ball mastery. Because as part of my work, we introduced a new play phase, which is for children aged 4, 5 and 6 years of age. So I wrote a whole new program. I took it out to the game, and the format that we want the children to play is 2 versus 2. Because in 2 versus 2, you can do a lot yourself, but you've also got the option to pass it. And it gives the coaches an opportunity to say, oh, that was a great dribble. But that was a great time to pass to your friend. So we can start in an age-appropriate way. We can start the decision-making process off because we are using a format that will give the kids loads of touches, loads of decisions, loads of actions individually on the ball, but it will present opportunities to say, that was a great time to share it, or that would have been a great time to share it, and just put that onto the player's psyche. And because they're 5 and 6 years of age, we've got another 10 years to polish that decision-making ability that we've started at 5 and 6 years of age. But it comes down to the format.
Completely agree. You said there that you've evolved this and you've written this recently. Does that mean that the previous version was more 1v1?
There wasn't a version.
All right.
We approached one of our county FAs and said, how many players have you got registered as development players? And that means they are brought in at 5 years of age, 6 years of age, and they were going to be coached to become an under-7 team with a grassroots club at some point in the near future. The county FA that we contacted said there were 992 children registered in this category, and they weren't one of the biggest county FAs. So if you multiply that across the country, in that age bracket of 5 and 6 years of age, we have got thousands and thousands and thousands of children who we need to make sure that we get it right with. Mm-hmm. For the ones who will go on to be the footballers, we can start the ball mastery, the decision-making processes. For the ones who don't go on, because not everybody will, we can still deliver a program in such a way that they fall in love with the football, they fall in love with being active, and they stay an active participant in sport in some respect for the rest of their lives. That's what that program was about.
Love that. Mas, I know with your futsal background, you were keen to talk to Peter around futsal.
Yes. So how did because I first come across, I was playing in the league for the likes of Helvetia and Bacco at some point, and that's when I come across yourself. So how did that come about? How did the futsal program in England come about, and your involvement, I guess?
Yeah. When I was regional coach for Yorkshire, the national finals were held in Sheffield. And each year, in order to enter the European aspect of the futsal, the winners of the English Cup would represent England. When I was a regional coach, the team that won it was Doncaster Deaf. So it was a team of deaf players who had a coach, John Smith. He was brilliant, both with the players but also with the deaf community. He was a signer, he wasn't deaf himself. But he coached the team. And because I was the regional coach, the FA in their wisdom says, on the European tournament, we want you to go with the team. And so I was thrown into this, working with a group of deaf players, and I didn't sign at the time. But John was brilliant in integrating me into the team and the environment that he created. So I went on 2 trips with them to 2 European competitions, and I was just absolutely sold on the game. I'd already been introduced to it with the Brazilian soccer schools and this fascination with Brazil and obviously futsal. But that really sparked, everything that followed. And when the position to become the head coach of the senior men's came up, I applied and I was lucky enough to get it. So I worked with the England seniors for 8 years. And we went from being competitive to actually qualifying for those later rounds in both European and FIFA competitions, which was brilliant for the group of players.
Brilliant.
I'm a massive fan of futsal.
Yes. Do you think we do, or is there space for futsal in the academy, in football academies, and especially, let's say, in the foundation phase? I know they do now a competition.
Yeah, the Premier League have been brilliant. Yeah, the Premier League have been brilliant by including a futsal tournament as part of. It's almost part of the development programs. It's on a couple of levels. It's trying to promote the game of futsal. It's also trying to offer the players in our foundation phase a really varied games program. So in a season, our foundation phase players will play futsal, they'll play other small-sided competitions, they'll play overloaded matches, they'll play underloaded matches, so that they're getting such a variety of formats and experiences. We are really blasting them with so many things that we are hoping will give them all the things that they need to progress through the pathway and become a professional footballer. But the Premier League have been a great promoter of it. We've now got England Futsal, who are really promoting the game, certainly at grassroots and at the National League levels. And so it's not going to go away. And it's taken a long time, but I think it has to be absolutely firmly established within the landscape for player development within this country.
How frequently are academy players, say a child is in a Category 1 club, how frequently would they play futsal typically?
Some would do it on a regular basis, and I mean weekly. Some might do it in the lead up to the Premier League tournament, or if they've arranged an additional fixture, they would do some work with them. So it's still in its embryonic phase, if you like, because academy coaches, quite rightly, if they're going to go on a course, it will be a football course. But lots of them have engaged with our futsal courses, particularly the UEFA B futsal, which really talks about the tactics, the set plays, all the nuances that the game can give. And I think we want players who are not just skillful, which futsal will give them in bucket loads. We also want them to be tactically aware, as well as technically proficient. And I think futsal is a great learning tool to allow that to happen.
So how many Premier League tournaments are there a year for an under-9 player?
In futsal,
For futsal?
one.
So there's just one per year?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's over a weekend, so
Yeah.
they'll play multiple games.
So if there's a academy that is only spending their time playing futsal when they prepare for that tournament and that one time per year, it's likely they're not getting much compared to Brazilians, for example, or Spanish.
If it's integrated in the program throughout the year,
Yeah.
surely the benefits would
No, I
obviously-
agree. And some clubs are doing that.
Do you know which clubs are doing that?
I know Preston, they ran their own futsal. It was like a futsal competition, a futsal league.
Yeah.
So there were teams within the Northwest that would play futsal against the other foundation phase academies on a regular basis. I don't know how widespread that is. But when I was lucky enough to go to Sao Paulo on a study visit, and we went to Corinthians, and they have a twin track program, and they don't say you either do futsal or you do football. They say you do both until
only-
around 16,
yeah,
and
later
then
years.
either the coach chooses, you choose, or you negotiate together as to where you think your future lies.
Yeah.
But up until then, they would organise fixtures so that players could play competitively futsal and football. I don't think we're at that stage yet.
Do you think this is something we...
I would love that to happen.
I need to interrupt the podcast one more time. Did you know that We Make Footballers is a franchise business? We began franchising in 2015 and we now have over 60 franchises in operation across the UK, Dubai and US, serving over 10,000 players. If you're a talented coach but don't want to start your own coaching business alone, visit franchisewmf.com to find out how We Make Footballers can help you operate a successful football coaching company. Do you know how frequently Chelsea play futsal in the under-9s?
I think they'll do some lead up to the tournament, perhaps. But even then, it's not like they use like an indoor court or anything. I don't think it's still in what the facilities clubs have.
And
So-
do either of you know how it compares to Germany, Spain, Portugal?
The big thing about Portugal and Spain is that futsal is the recognised game in schools. So if you're not getting it at Barcelona's academy, which you probably are, you're going to be doing it at school. And so...
It's more of a cultural thing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's embedded in the culture. So
Yeah.
it's just what you do.
Yeah.
Where here we still have some... work
But
to do
Germany
with
has
that.
gone big time on futsal.
Have they?
Their programme has just exploded to the point where I think they'll become. It might take a generation. No, I think it'll happen before then. I think they'll become a real force in futsal. They have really gone for it in a way that our national association didn't.
And will that transcend to also football as well?
I don't know what the relationship is between the two, because
But what I mean is that you said that they're going to be successful with futsal, and we are kind of all agreeing that futsal has benefits to football from a development point of view.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose my question was, do you see that the German national team will really benefit?
It could be because of that. They've also started their Funinho sessions. So in what would be their foundation phase, they are advocating 3v3. So they are all the things that we said 2v2, 3v3, futsal will give us. They have done their research over the last 2 or maybe 3 years, and at a stroke they have said, if you are playing in these age categories, you will play this format. And that format is 3v3 to begin with, and then the numbers are added and scaled up appropriately to the players' ages. But what they want is to produce the type of player that we're all after. The players who are highly skillful, great decision makers, because they will openly admit that they produce a particular type of player. They're very strategic, very organised, very structured in their play. And then suddenly Musiala comes along, who was built upon the courts and the experiences that he had in London, as a young child. And they've seen what is possible. So they've changed all of their grassroots. They've got massive districts, and they have competence centres that are dotted around where we would have academies. They're the breeding ground for the players who then go into the academies. And in those competence centres, they play 3v3. It's going to look like this. It's 3v3 without goalkeepers. It's 3v3 with goalkeepers. We play these rules. If a goal is scored, a player comes on. So everybody gets loads and loads of football. So they've got their own version of what we're trying to create here. They will become a major, major power, both in organisation and structure, which I think the Germans are, renowned for. But they're going to add these little glimpses of massive, skillful players to almost embellish what they're really already good at. It's frightening for me.
Okay.
Seriously, because I thought we'd made quite a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But we forget that the other countries are not standing still. Germany certainly isn't.
Well, that's why investigating youth football I find so interesting. I find it fascinating because we watch the Euros and all you're seeing there is the results of the football environment, the football culture, all of the strategies that all the youth programs have had. And then this is the culmination, even involved in your recruitment. What types of players are you trying to recruit? How are you training them? All of that. I love it. And then that's why I really was getting into the conversation with John Oldpress. It was just after we lost the final to Spain, and the first half Spain had 70% possession, and I was saying to him, "Why is that? Why is that? What's your opinion? Why do you think we weren't able to hold on to the ball in that half?"
I think the strength of the team comes from the ability of each individual player, and I think possession is lost, particularly because it's my domain. If you're looking at young players, possession is usually lost because of one player's inability under pressure. And that could be the pressure of the decisions that they have to make, the pressure of an opponent, the pressure of time and space on the ball. And I think if you can improve each individual player, when you put them together collectively, they are better placed and better prepared to keep possession as a team. And I think that's what Spain have and we're still striving for. Their individual ability is still higher than ours in every position on the pitch.
Is that with the ball or without the ball?
Well, it's
or both.
I think it's both, because I think they are. There's a term about playing in the future. I think when it gets really tough and really tight, their players can still play in the future, and that might be one pass ahead or two passes ahead. I think we still play in the present, and we have glimpses where we actually play in the future. So I think there's development to go on. And if I can go back to that thing about, are we spending too much time keeping players on the ball? It's fascinating because I've been looking into this recently, and if their cognitive attention is still on the ball, they're not going to look around for the next decision. So do we leave them until the time is right and their head starts coming up before we start that decision-making element of it, or that paying attention to everything that's around you? Or we've got the player on the ball. Do we work on your decision-making or on processing information from the landscape on the players that are not on the ball? So in another way, we are helping them work on their decision-making about who can you see, who might be a danger, where's a space. So if you get the ball, what's a big space to go into? So we're already working on their ability to attend to, the information that is out there. And we leave that a little bit longer until we bring the two things together. And then we can suddenly combine the development that's happened while they're off the ball but they're already becoming more aware of what's around them. And then we combine that with their ability on the ball because they're now ready to lift their head up. So I think we have to have that approach. So in answer to your question, I think we could do more work when the players are out of possession on their awareness and their future decision making.
Marcelo, on the way here, we were having a conversation around an article that you'd recently read where someone an English coach had gone to Spain and really tried to investigate what they're doing so differently. Are you able to talk a little bit about that article?
Yeah, it was quite similar to what you just said. It's the tendencies perhaps the Spanish youth player has compared to over here, and it's their awareness of where the ball is, where the opponents are, where their own teammates are, and where the space is, and the decision of playing in the future, like you said, varies to the player here. The tendencies. It was really interesting how they see things and how some of their coaches, perhaps the types of questions they ask their players in practice. But it's quite similar to what you've just described there.
There was that one specific example that you gave me, which you said that the coach was encouraging his player not to dribble at the player's feet, but get at the angle.
Yeah, so it was... the Spanish player will tend to not dribble towards the defender, but dribble at an angle to be able to shift the defender and then change direction. But again, it's just the awareness of where the space is.
Yeah,
which is the key to Alex.
We are really. I'm working with a small group of coaches on trying to understand time and space and what that might mean to very, very young players. And I think this is where, for me, it all begins to fit together. So it's not just one piece of the jigsaw. We have to know it all and then try to,
piece it all together,
bring it all together. If I think you're right, if a player gets the ball in this country, they will immediately make a beeline to an opponent. Part of our staying on the ball strategy within the England Foundation Phase DNA was to say, stay on the ball, but see what happens when you move into space, either laterally or at an angle. Because as soon as you do that, you disorganise the defenders that are in front of you. Because you will change your position if I dribble with the ball this way. That opens up different spaces than there were before you had the ball. So tactically, you can begin to disorganise and influence what your opponent does by you staying on the ball. And we've got young players now who know that if I do this with the ball, it's going to affect the defenders in this way. Their teammates know that when they do that, these are the spaces that are going to open up. And they're the ones that we want to exploit and pass the ball into. We are shouting, pass the ball, and we don't really know what the landscape is like. So I think there's a whole host of work that we could do. And the really exciting bit is that if we as coaches can understand it and break it down into a way that all coaches can say, I can have a go at that. I can do that with my kids. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great practice to begin to work on these things. Suddenly, it's like a contagion, and we can spread this development right through the game.
Yeah, 100%. I coach this group of under 7, under 8s players, and they're all talented. They all are at academies, like the top academies. So a great, great group. We play 7-a-side. And the thing that I think I struggle with most with all the players is their angles. It really frustrates me. I'm constantly just looking at them and I'm saying that you're in a bad angle here. The player would pass you the ball, but your angle is horrible, or they get there so late, they're so reactive. The ball is travelling back to the goalkeeper and the left defender is just hanging up on the halfway line. And in my head, I'm just like, I want you to drop deep and I want you to open up that left foot. I don't get to train the team because they're all at academies and then they just turn up on this Sunday. So I'm relying on what the academies are doing in their development centres. I would guess that at those development centres, there's not too many angles being taught. I don't think it's massively in our programme. Would you?
I don't know. I don't know what they do in the development centres.
You do. You haven't seen. All right.
No,
well,
it does get taught. They
do.
play a lot of 2v2s
But do they? But I don't think they coach it. I think they facilitate. I think they set up a 2v2 and then they watch it. They assess.
But this is where that just depends on the coach. If the coach's knowledge and experience is there and they're able and they're confident enough to teach that, then great.
Yeah.
But not every coach is going to be like that.
I think coming back to your point, Sean, it's an interesting one. I think coaches in this country focus on position rather than positioning. And there's a very, very subtle difference, because I could be playing in centre mid, but the positioning that I take up within that has to be in relation to the time and space available, on the pitch and whoever's got the ball. So I think we get hung up with X's and O's and, you're here and you're there, and when the ball goes there, this is where you go. As soon as the ball starts rolling, it is so random and so unpredictable, because the one thing you definitely cannot control is what your opponents do. So you have to be aware of what they're doing in order for you to influence and disrupt whatever they decide to do. And I don't think we spend enough time on it. And just working with players on, don't think about holding that position. Think about your positioning. Is that opening up a passing line? Is your body position right so that when you get it, you can travel quickly forward or play forward quickly? Because if you're receiving the ball like that, at that angle, you're going to get closed down and you're still facing your own goal. I think we can have those conversations with kids, but it has to be in appropriate language and done in an appropriate way, combined with masses and masses of practice.
So do you think that the current FA structure that has improved so much, and obviously I always say this, even though we're so determined that we want improvement, we also do recognise how much we have improved as a football nation over the past 10-20 years, and we've seen those results in our first team and our senior team. But do you think that's the next step? That's what we've got to try and build into our courses that aren't there at the moment?
I think it's already there.
It is.
I just think there was a new course released last year, the UEFA C Youth.
Yeah. And
the majority of that content is about coaching effectively in 2v2s, 2v1s, 3v2s, 3v3s, small number practices that can later on be placed within larger number practices. Because if us three were really effective playing 3v3, that would mean we would know exactly when to release the ball. We would all know how to create passing angles and passing lines between each other. So we could actually be placed in an 8v8 game, and actually the three of us, we could be quite effective together because of the understanding that we've taken from a small number of practices. So one of the big messages that we're trying to get over at the moment is become really expert and proficient at coaching in small number practices, and then begin to place those or insert those into larger number practices so that you can help the players when there's more numbers, less space, more decisions to make. I think it was a missing link. It's certainly been addressed.
Earlier on, when I was asking you about what was some of the strengths of the English program and our senior team, and one of the things that you mentioned was tactics. But I'd just like to challenge that, because do you think that we have always been tactically astute?
If I'm honest, no. I think we are prepared to work to a script that has been practiced beforehand. The more we look into the game of football, the more the more we recognise that it's played within an environment that is constantly changing, it's random, and it's unpredictable. I'm not sure you can be successful if you're sticking to a pre-described or a pre-agreed script in an environment that is random, unpredictable, and so easy to change and influence.
Right.
So I think, and it comes from the experiences we put the players in, and that comes from all of the formats that they're, all of the formats that they are playing when they're young. So we are blasting them with so many different experiences now. That is increasing the levels of randomness, unpredictability. So I'm hoping that we then are able to develop a generation of coaches that are willing to be more tactically flexible, and the players are more comfortable when the coach says, we're not playing like this today, we're playing like that. And I think if you've got a generation of players who are very set in their ways, that, you know, if you're a centre half, all you do is kick it and head it. I think we've gone way past that now. But I do think there's more ground to be made up by players having the ability to be more flexible and adaptable in the things that they can do and the techniques and decisions that they can make. Combine that with a coach who is willing to be more tactically creative and flexible. I think that's when the magic starts to happen.
That team that was referred to as the English golden generation, with Rooney, Scholes, Gerrard, Lampard, Beckham, Ashley Cole, Ferdinand, that group, so many talented players. You always see the photo pop up on social media every so often, and everyone in the comments is, why didn't they win anything? You know, they get so frustrated. What do you think that group were lacking?
I think, and I mean, I don't know this to be absolutely true, but I know it's come out in the media that there were certain cliques, there was an atmosphere within the dressing room, and I think that stops you becoming a team that can really reach your potential. I think if you've got a team that is as star-studded as that, they should be getting to really the sharp end of tournaments. So something must have been missing at some point. I think the environment that Gareth created filled those gaps. But then when we go back to tactical flexibility, then I think you have to sometimes take a deep breath and make a really brave decision. And I think we were reluctant to make those at critical points, you know, when they needed to be made. And I'm Gareth's biggest fan, but I think if he had to make a decision, it would probably be more with defensive cover in mind, rather than saying we really need to take the brakes off.
With that golden generation then, with the disharmony that you identified in the changing room, maybe you're saying that it's more in the social corner and the psychological corner for that golden generation, not necessarily technical, tactical.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've referenced some of the courses that I've been involved in and John Allpress has been involved in. Certainly the FA courses now, the psych and social part is as important, if not more important, than the tech and tack. Because if you haven't got players or young children in the right place for learning, you can have the best information in the world, but they're not ready to receive it. And I think one of the biggest switches that we made was with the help of a gentleman called Craig Simmons, who worked at the old National School and was massively influential in my development, John Allpress's development, and the development of courses. He said if we get the psych and social right, the rest will begin to fall into place. And he's been proven right. He actually passed away recently. And it's such a loss because he was a real font of knowledge and a massive resource for, for everyone involved in the game.
And for grassroots coaches, what can they do on a Saturday, Sunday to help their players with the social and the psychological corners of the game? If you ask any under-7 coach or most under-7 coaches how many players are in their squad, they will say, 8, 9, 10. The format they play is 5v5. So immediately, every weekend, we are already planning for 3 players not to play.
That cannot be right. So if you throw that into an environment where everything is on a result at the weekend, and if you win, you're the best coach ever. If you lose, you're the worst coach ever. And the pressure that creates. You've already got players who are not playing. So the players who will start will probably be your better players. So how can we make sure that we create an environment where every player plays a full game every week? For me, the answer is you've got to come away from a single fixture at the weekend, and you've got to reduce the format. So if you've got a squad of 10 and you play another team of 10, you can have four, how many? 20 players. You can have 4 2v2 games going on. No, 5 2v2 games going on at the same time. Everybody plays. It's not on one game, because after a 10-minute game, everybody swaps around and plays another 2v2 and another 2v2 and another 2v2. You don't need pitches marked out. You don't need referees for every game, because what you're saying is to the kids is, we trust you to run the game, to know when it's a foul, to know whose ball it is when it goes out of play. Your job is to come, be active for an hour, play as many games as you can, have as many touches as you can, enjoy it as much as you can, and we won't put any pressure on you. That would be my gift to the game. If somebody says, Pete, we'll grant you one wish, that would be it.
What age group would that go up to?
I would start off, because in our play phase, the format is 2v2. So they would play that at under 5s and under 6s. At under 7s and 8s, they would play 3v3. For all the learning about passing angles, knowing when to release the ball, knowing when to do something yourselves, they would play 3v3 at 7 and 8s, and we wouldn't play 5v5 until under 9s and under 10s. Because developmentally, I think the cognitive capacity to make decisions in a 5v5 is better when you are under 9s and under 10s. Now, it doesn't mean that anybody younger couldn't do that, but I think developmentally that's more appropriate. And what you've got in the 4 years before then are millions and millions of touches, millions and millions of decisions that you can then take into that 5v5 game. And then the pressure can increase, because we know competition is important. It can then go down to smaller fixtures at the weekend. But when you are first starting, you have to think that you belong to what is going on. And if you're one of those 3 players that are not playing, how can you possibly believe that football is for you?
Love that.
Brilliant. No, it's good. It's really good.
What's your opinion on that, Marcelo?
I agree. I think it would be beneficial for the children. Essentially, more game time, more fun they're going to have, more engaged in the sport they're going to be. And yeah, I struggle sometimes with 6 and 7 year olds playing 5v5.
It's too much. And that's why you get coaches shouting, pass it, pass it, pass it, because the kids don't really know what to do or how to play that game with so many players on the pitch. So the coaches are almost structuring every decision. So you're losing 2 years of decision making straight away, because we are making the decisions. Mm-hmm. If you reduce the format, I'm in a 2v2. I've got 2 decisions. I'm going to do something myself, or I'm going to think about bringing you into it and we do something together.
So just to clarify what you're proposing, it would be scrapping what we currently have with the grassroots infrastructure of 5v5 games program for under 8s and below. We currently have 7 aside for under 9s, under 10s, and then it goes 9 aside under 11. Have I got that correct? Yeah? It goes 9 aside under 11 up until, when does it go 11 aside?
Well, I think the FA is currently considering moving that age band back a little bit so that they play that 9v9 for a little bit longer.
Okay.
But there's no decision being made, or I certainly have been informed.
It goes 11 aside at under 13 or under 12?
It can go at under 12.
All right, okay. So that's what we have in England. Do you have an idea what they do in Spain? Because I've seen kids playing on big pitches in Spain.
Yeah. I think the format issue, I don't think we can compare that to Spain, because they do play 7v7 earlier. So they play larger formats earlier. But I don't know in enough detail what goes on in their development programs so that they can play those formats more effectively than we do.
I'm just going to interrupt the podcast for 30 seconds to tell you about We Make Footballers. We Make Footballers are the largest football coaching provider to children aged 4 to 12 in the UK, operating across 200 facilities. We focus on developing the individual, working on the technical and physical components of the game, and it's had amazing results, with hundreds of our ex-players joining professional academies and 4 of our ex-players currently playing in the Premier League. Our program is built around small-sided play using indoor and outdoor facilities. Visit our website, WeMakeFootballers.com, to see if we have a training facility in your area. Because that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And I have a coaching school, and in that one, the children all do 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, and some of the children will be doing that maybe 3 sessions a week.
Yeah.
And then if you're getting in, because I understand what you're thinking, it's like you're thinking that the children are not getting any 3v3, and so then if they're starved of that, then, well, we've got to find a way to control the masses, and you can control grassroots because that's what everyone's motivated for. So then, yeah, you make the change there. Whereas if Spain, which almost comes across as this like utopia, and they currently have in my opinion, the best football nation in the world right now. So that's what we should be looking to. So they, I think, have a lot of 2v2, 3v3 futsal in their program, then culminating on a weekend for this one game, which is larger sided. And I think they would have larger sided games so that children get an early understanding of positional play and what a large game looks like, and they can make longer passes, shorter passes. You know, they build through the thirds up the pitch because they are in those triangles like you described, and they're building as little small units getting up there. So our kids would then miss out on that. They'd miss out maybe on some of the tactical side of the game if they missed it, and motivationally as well. It is fun having a 5v5 and 7v7, getting closer to real football.
And to be fair, if you ask a lot of the kids, playing a larger format is what they want to do for exactly the reason you've said. It's nearer the bigger game. Developmentally, I see massive benefits in keeping the formats slightly smaller for longer. And I have a wider agenda. I love football, but I want every kid who chooses football to get the most from it. And at the moment, some kids who choose football, who love it, are not getting the most out of it because they are denied the opportunity to play full games every week. And I think coaches are getting better at sharing it round and you know, bringing the subs on and making sure that everybody gets equal time. But I still think there's a lot more that we could make. Regarding tactics, I think because we tend to go to 11-a-side earlier, if you did it at 12, I think then tactics takes over when skill development is still not complete. And I think that there's almost a belief that the skill development window is now closed. So it now has to be tactics, positions, you do this, I move the magnetic board here and there and everywhere. What we're forgetting is that for some kids, around 11, 12, 13, they're all entering puberty. And as soon as you enter puberty and your limbs become longer and completely different to they might have been 12 months ago, you almost have to re-enter a skill acquisition phase because the ball is no longer at the same distance from your feet that it has been for the last, 8 years. So I really see skill acquisition, it never really ends. It obviously diminishes as you get nearer the professional game, but they still work on their free kicks, their ability to drive the ball, all of those things. But I think we say that skill development is finished or it's not now a priority too early. And we certainly I would look at someone developing a skill acquisition program for those players going through puberty, so that they reconnect with their new body, because it is a new body.
Yeah.
It's stronger. It might be taller. You know, what you are capable of is very different than what you were pre-puberty.
Yeah.
That affects your ability on the ball and what you can do, and certainly affects your decision making.
Talking a little bit more about grassroots football and the environment, how much do you see parents with bad behaviour?
If I speak to county FAs, it is still a huge problem for them.
Yeah.
And I, rightly or wrongly, interpret this as it's a result of, it's one game at the weekend and everything is on that result. So if we can almost dissolve that a little bit by having multiple games, so that it's not all dependent on one, then you won't get parents who are frustrated if they've given all this time in the week, they're paying their subs, they're doing all the fetching and carrying and taking the kids, and they play for 10 minutes on a Saturday or a Sunday, or their team loses, and suddenly tempers get, frayed. And the abuse of referees, who in some instances are children themselves, I think that there is just no place for it. And I think the competitive nature of one fixture every weekend is part of a quite complex, conundrum. But I think we can address that immediately.
Yeah. It's often, for me, I think that the masses and the English culture can often spoil it, because I get the feeling that Spain, Portugal, Holland, the culture there, it would allow for competition. Like, the rules could say you can have competition, because I think on the whole the people would be calmer. You're looking at me, shaking your head.
It's still quite hostile.
Oh, I see.
It's really hostile.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If you go to even Argentina and places like this, or youth games, there's sometimes like hundreds of people watching, and it can be quite hostile. Even Portugal grassroots, I think it's everywhere.
It's there.
I think the culture of how they perhaps perceive football and what it is different to here, but it happens everywhere.
So, challenging all ourselves, because it seems logical that a calmer, quieter environment would be a better development environment, but maybe is it not? Maybe is there something in having a lot of passion, having noise coming? Is there something that motivates the children or makes them love football even more? I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah. It's a hard one, isn't it? Because it's like you're having to re-educate the masses almost to try and get that everyone calm. I think it's hard. It would be hard to do, and it's pretty hard to just control every environment you go into, because some clubs will have their way of doing things and others will have their way. But I see it in Portugal. It gets pretty hostile,
because it's the love of the football. It's
the passion.
People just love it so much.
For a lot of families, it's the one thing that's what they have. It's what they believe in. It's the football.
If you take our current World Cup winners, Argentina, Brazil has got futsal, Argentina's got baby football. Now, if you don't know baby football, if you Google it, it'll be exactly what you've said. It's a bear pit. It's a futsal court, indoor. They also play outdoors, 6-a-side. And there are parents around the touchline in a sports hall, and it is a bear pit. But the atmosphere is not aggressive. It's not violent. It's support and encouragement for the players. And these kids are 6, 7, 8 years of age. And there is huge rivalry between the different barrios in Argentina, particularly in Buenos Aires. And when you look at their players playing in the World Cup final, you don't have to worry about whether they can cope with that hostile, pressurized environment because they've grown up with it. It's not an issue. And when you watch these 6 and 7 year olds playing baby football, it's not skillful. It's very kids colliding. It's kicking it. There's no real composure on the ball because it's so frantic. So I'm not contradicting myself, because I think calm, uncompetitive environments are great. But at some point, and in a controlled way, and not in an aggressive, violent way, we need to slowly increase the pressure on our children alongside that development in the psychosocial corner, so that they can cope with making a mistake and everybody's going, all of those things.
Exactly. That is something that I feel that I'm moving towards the spectrum, where I used to be so much like, no, everything's silent on the sidelines. You do not say anything. And that World Cup, when Messi scored one of the penalties, the roar from the Argentinian crowd, and then watching the celebrations afterwards, I think they are the most passionate football nation in the world. I think Argentina.
They will put that all down to baby football.
Right.
Seriously, we on the trip to Sao Paulo in Brazil, we went to Buenos Aires, and they are convinced that baby football gives Argentina exactly what futsal gives Brazil.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's nuanced. And this is where it's so hard, and it's good on a podcast because you can talk about the intricacies of this and where you want to be. And, I'd like to think, we're very level-headed, intelligent people. Sometimes there are some parents on the sidelines where you could maybe take hours and hours and hours explaining this to them, and they wouldn't understand it. And the nuance goes, and so then you're just having to have like black and white rules to say, well, no, you just please don't talk on the sideline, because the clip that I saw went viral recently of like these parents fighting in Birmingham recently. I don't know if you saw it. They're all like battering each other, and this was at a kids game, and it's so bad.
I mean, it's how you harness a really fierce competitive environment with young player development particularly. And I think the role of the coach is to help the players understand how to cope with winning, losing, playing well, playing badly, with all of those imposters, dealing with those with dignity, respect and sportsmanship. And the parents can do that, because you can be really vociferous in supporting your team, but at the end of it, it has to be sporting, it has to be fair, it has to be, you were the better team today. Or, I think that social corner development and the role of the coach and all the adults involved in the game is to help the players cope with all of those things in the best possible way.
Love that. When we were talking about futsal, and we ended up talking on another subject and we moved away from it, but I just want to come back to it. And we were talking outside about your futsal journey, Marcelo, and you ended up starting futsal quite late in your career.
Yeah, so I started at around, I think it was like 25, so it was through meeting Rob. I think we'd played together, and then he said, come and play futsal, and it was a game changer. It's a fun sport, and it was funny because when I went back to playing 11-a-side, it seemed so much easier because of the space and time, and essentially my decision making was better. So it was a game changer, and it real eye opener for what it can do to help young kids in their development.
So for your young son Mason, will you look to get him in futsal?
Oh yeah, 100%.
At what age?
I'm looking to do it this year actually. So he's in under 6. Yeah,
He's 3.
So he's in under 6 now. Well, winter season's coming up. It's cold outside. It's going to be a futsal session a week. I think he'll find it fun, and it would help them with the
Absolutely.
development.
Yeah. The one thing that you're going to get huge practice at in futsal is playing under pressure, having the levels of repetition of you touching the ball, the decisions you make, the movements you're going to have to make in relation to other people. It's just going to go through the roof. I just think it's almost, am I allowed to say football on
steroids?
Steroids. Yeah, it's, and I've seen it firsthand. And you talk about decision making. When I was with the England team, there was no way I could shout on what they needed to do next.
Yeah.
Because by the time I was ready to say it, it had already happened. So the ownership and choice that you can give to the players actually increases with futsal, and that really fits well with player development, and they're developing their own individual decision-making capability.
Mars, to help parents listening understand what to expect from a futsal session for an under-6 player, what are you expecting when you take Mason to futsal?
Well, indoor court, ball slightly heavier, just as equipment-wise. And it will still be small, very small-sided games at that age. But again, just to help them, put them in scenarios where they're going to face when they play football outside. So you're still looking at your 2v2s, 3v3s, 2v overloads, underloads. Some repetition of technique at that age, just so they can practice essentially, and get comfortable and build a really strong relationship with the ball. But again, and then it's up to whoever's coaching it to be able to coach the techniques or the specific movements.
Yeah, because I think that sometimes parents and even coaches that don't have a great understanding of futsal, but then they try to do it because maybe it can seem that, that's where I could maybe make money. This is on trend right now. So then they run a futsal program, but then maybe they start to try and teach rotations and movements much too early to young players, and it might bore the children. It might put them off. It might be time that's spent where they should just literally just be touching the ball and getting familiar with it. But a parent doesn't know any better because they've listened to a podcast like this. They're saying, I need to go futsal. Ronaldinho did it. So then they bring their young player, and really for getting them to master the ball, that's the most important thing in the journey for an under-6, under-7 player. But master or whoever
again,
wants to ask,
it's just relative to the player.
You did say that.
Let's not forget that, because a player who at 6 has already done hundreds of hours of ball mastery and now their eyes are up, then you can probably start to introduce. It just depends on the player.
There's this notion of there's like biological age or chronological age. So the child is 6, but their football age might be 8, or it might be 4. That's what we want the coach or the parent to begin to notice, that they might be in this age group, but they're either ahead of the curve, right on track, or they're behind the curve. And it's just where they happen to be at that time. And it's not their fault. It's not that they're a bad player or they're never going to get it. They will get it in their own time.
Because you see it, don't you, at Grassroots, and he's playing up, so my son should be, or they get fascinated with playing up, or even upset if their child is asked to play across an age group, down, where it shouldn't be like that. It's what's best for your child, essentially, in their development.
It would be really nice if in a foundation phase that, let's just say, for example, under 9s, 10s and 11s, that on a regular basis they were mixed together. So you'd have under 9s playing with the older age groups, you'd have vice versa. And so you'd almost try to negate completely this notion of playing up or playing down. Because if you are training and playing regularly right across, either one age band or 2 age bands, then it's not a big thing or a really damaging thing if your child is then selected to play up or down one particular week. I think in some academies now, this phrase about playing across. So you will play across 9s, 10s and 11s at any given point. And it's so that we can try to provide you with the most appropriate challenge for where you're currently at. You know, and if a player is constantly played down, but in every game they're getting more shots on goal, they're getting more chance to practice their finishing, because
100%.
that's an area that we want to develop.
Yeah.
Don't worry about them playing up, because if they're playing up, they might get one shot in the whole game. Here, they're getting 8, they're getting 9, so they're getting a real chance to practice. That's what we want them to get better at.
Yeah, 100%.
Peter, you know, it's been amazing listening to you. Like I said at the very start, you know, I'm a huge fan of you as a coach. You know, I've been on your courses and I've followed you and I've read your material. I asked you about your legacy, and yeah, absolutely. You know, you have such a strong reputation. If you ask people who work in youth football, you know, about Peter Sturgess, you know, they all have such positive things to say about you and talk about what they've learned from your work. So yeah, thank you for what you've contributed to English football. We close the podcast by asking each guest to try and tell us what their most proudest moment in their career has been.
Proudest moment was in, there's got to be lots, but I'm going to choose one. We were in Lithuania with the England futsal, and for the first time ever we qualified for the main round, and it was in the winter, and the players stripped off and ran outside and dived in the snow, and there was just such a feeling of exhilaration. When I say stripped off, they still had their slips on, but kick came off, dived in the snow, and it was just one of those moments that you will never forget. And it was special for me as the head coach, but what it meant to the players who'd been through a program that had been battered and bruised for years, and then suddenly we just had this glimpse of success, and it was magical.
Brilliant.
I love that. You run your own podcast. Can you tell our audience where they might be able to find more about the podcast and find more about you? Yes,
we've got a website. They can find it on www.thesessioncollective.co.uk. It's specifically aimed at coaches, parents, anyone who's interested in the coaching of young children, and all the podcasts are on there. We have 5 sections. In my experience as a coach and working with lots of grassroots coaches, the one thing that they said that they needed most was session ideas, because they might have a full-time job, they're driving in their car from work to training, and you know that they haven't got time to plan the session. So we've broken our content down into 5 areas: 1v1 work, pairs work, fun games, physical activities, all of those. And there are 5 activities on all the time, and every week we replace with a new one. So we didn't want to just wipe them all clean. So there's new practices added each week.
Yeah.
And obviously you can find the podcasts on there, and lots of other information, particularly regarding the play phase for our very youngest players. And I'm really excited about building and putting more content into that part of the website. But thanks for allowing us to talk about it.
Oh, of course. And yeah, I want to pick up again earlier on when you talked about your gift to the game and what your one wish would be with that utopia that you described for grassroots football in England, and how that would help us. And maybe, you know, young coaches, we do have a big audience now we've collected, so maybe, you know, it will get out there into the consciousness, and who knows. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll keep in contact.
No, thank you. It's been great.
Cool.